how the United States has enabled Russia to invade Ukraine, which is likely the first step toward Russia's rebuilding of its Soviet empire. At the time of this filming, Russia has, for all intents and purposes, declared war upon Ukraine by invading the semi-autonomous Crimea region of Ukraine. Russia leases military bases in the Sevastopol region of Crimea. It is the home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, but Crimea is constitutionally a part of Ukraine. To Ukraine, this is a foreign invasion of their sovereign territory, an act of war. This report will analyze why the past foreign policy decisions of the United States have enabled Russia's present invasion of Ukraine and why we may be powerless to prevent Russia's reassembling of the Soviet Union. This article is for, if I am correct regarding Russia's long-term intentions, those good watchmen with eyes to see, and if I am wrong, in hopes that we may learn from and correct our mistakes now, before they become the tragedies discussed in future history books. Please note, any criticism of past American military decisions in this report is directed at the politicians who control and determine our military policy, not the honorable, dedicated, and patriotic men and women who faithfully serve in our armed forces, past, present, and future. It is our duty as free citizens to question the political decisions and leaders which place the dedicated members of our armed services in harm's way as they serve without question. Reason 1. Our national debt. Reason 1 in support of the analysis that the United States has empowered Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Our national debt. The most significant threat to our national security is our debt. This quote is from former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Admiral Michael Mullen in August of 2010. At the time Admiral Mullen made that statement, our national debt was at $13 trillion. It is now at $17 trillion and counting. To put that in some perspective, every man, woman, and child in the United States currently owes $54,000 as their share of our national debt. Admiral Mullen was correct at 2010 debt levels, and even that much more correct now. Admiral Mullen knew and pointed out that our national debt would limit the future military choices of the United States because our military can only be as healthy and effective as the economy which pays for it. With the President's proposed 2014 budget, the interest we pay on our debt is equal to about half of our total military budget. And it is more than we will spend on total veterans benefits all year. The stark economic reality is that the United States can't afford to intervene militarily on behalf of Ukraine. Not even speaking of putting American boots on the ground, the United States can't even afford to support the Ukraine. Russia's understanding of our debt crisis, which exceeds the understanding of most Americans, enabled their decision to now invade Ukraine. They knew in advance that we can afford to do almost nothing. It doesn't pay to argue with your banker. One additional reason our national debt enables Russia's current invasion of Ukraine is that through grossly irresponsible practices of Democrat and Republican administrations, foreign nations as of December 2013 own $5.8 trillion of our $17 trillion national debt, of which Russia owns $138.6 billion. Owning a portion of America's public debt gives these foreign nations leverage and power over the military and foreign policy decisions of the United States. While Russia's share of our national debt may be relatively small, if we were to intervene against them in defense of Ukraine, and Russia subsequently called in or quickly sold off their holdings of our debt, severe economic repercussions could deal a devastating blow to an already struggling American economy. Let me be very clear before we move on. The goal is not to reduce our national debt so that we have the freedom to intervene militarily against aggressors like Russia. War is a horrifying and last resort. The far more relevant point is that we enable aggressors such as Russia, Iran, and Assad's Syria when they know our national debt has weakened our ability to act if we choose to do so. You cannot walk softly and carry a big stick when you can't afford the walking shoes and that stick is partly owned by your enemies. Reason 2. Our overextended military. The second reason in support of the notion that the United States has enabled Russia to invade Ukraine and why we may be powerless to halt their future military efforts to rebuild the Soviet Union is our very overextended military. The more than decade-long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have come at enormous cost to our nation and, even more importantly, to a generation of young men and women serving in the front lines of these conflicts. In the combined Afghanistan-Iraq wars, 6,800 Americans have given their lives in the protection of our freedoms. More than 1 million Americans have been injured in Afghanistan and Iraq, but the total number of wounded is impossible to know because in late 2013, the Veterans Administration stopped releasing data on injured veterans as the total number topped 1 million. Even the noble men and women of our military who make it home physically safe and sound have suffered irreparable consequences because of their selfless service to our country. The military family divorce rate among returning Middle East veterans is up 42%. That is a staggering and sobering number of families shattered upon the arid rocks of Afghanistan and Iraq. The unemployment rate among veterans who served post 9/11 is 3% higher than that of the national average. Countless veterans are returning from service in the Middle East, cursed with post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health issues that they will continue to battle for decades after the ceasefire orders have been given. The total economic cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq is expected to be near $6 trillion. This includes the long-term health care of returning veterans and the expenses to rebuild and re-equip a military that has been deployed overseas for more than a decade. We owe it to the honorable men and women who served to be honest about the political results of these wars. They served without question to preserve our freedom to question our political and military leaders. After more than a decade and all these costs, we have removed Iraq as Iran's greatest threat and enemy and made Iraq a quasi-puppet state of Iran due to its overwhelmingly Persian Shia ethnic majority, which was subdued by the largely secular Ba'athist regime in Iraq, which we wisely funded during their 1980s war with Iran, but destroyed in the 2000s. As the LA Times headline said recently, 10 years after Iraq war began, Iran reaps the gains. As for Afghanistan, as the Russians showed us with their war in Afghanistan, trying to defeat Afghanistan in a modern, conventional war is a bit like trying to destroy a sponge with a sledgehammer. Hit it as hard as you like, it forms right back when you leave. The Taliban is poised to take back command of Afghanistan the moment we leave. As recent headlines indicate, from USA Today, as the U.S. looks to leave Afghanistan, Taliban could rush in. From Reuters, after a decade of war, Afghans mull Taliban return. Please don't misinterpret. I prefer to see the enemies of the United States laid waste to completely and utterly, rather than to see one American harmed. But that is not the type of war we engaged in with Afghanistan and Iraq. We bombed our enemies' mud huts only to build them concrete houses and schools. Our valiant soldiers were handicapped with politically motivated rules of engagement, all of which resulted in a diminishing of their efforts in these countries through no fault of those who served. It is inarguable that our decade-plus long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have weakened our current military capabilities and thus enabled Russia to expand militarily without likely action from the United States. Reason 3. No credibility equals no deterrent. Russia has been observing and even testing American foreign policy credibility during both the Obama and Bush administrations. During the Bush administration, promises were made and agreements signed between the United States and valuable Eastern European allies such as Poland and the Czech Republic, in which the U.S. agreed to offer certain military protections against Russian aggression aimed at these allies. These protections included missile defense capabilities. During the Obama administration, Russia voiced its displeasure at the U.S. helping our allies with purely defensive capabilities, and the Obama administration's reaction to Russia's objections was to abandon our allies and our agreements with them regarding missile defense. Russia had a dress rehearsal for their current invasion of Ukraine when in 2008 they invaded Georgia. The Bush administration allowed Russia to invade Georgia and wage the Russo-Georgian War without any repercussions. Only days after then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice announced, while standing beside the Georgian president, "Mr. President, we always fight for our friends." With regard to Iran's nuclear weapons project, which gains some support from Russia, President Obama continues to claim Iran is dismantling their program and calls for negotiations with Iran when the world knows that Iran's program continues and it is only bolstered by Obama's Orwellian policy of ignorance is strength. Even more recently, President Obama announced that Syria could not cross the red line he was drawing regarding the use of chemical and biological weapons without changing Obama's equation, a line which Assad's Syrian regime promptly and disdainfully crossed, partly strengthened by Russian support. Apparently, President Obama's equation is the absolute value of zero, because there were no repercussions for Syria crossing his red line. Whether you agree with American involvement in Syria or not, our president cannot make such a bold statement and then follow it with no action. A lack of American credibility in foreign affairs, particularly regarding Russia, over the last several years, has shown Russia that we are no deterrent to their aggression whatsoever, and as such the United States has enabled Russia's current military expansion. Russia's invasion of Georgia was a test we failed. Their current invasion of Ukraine is likely the last test before Russia systematically rebuilds the Soviet Union. President Bush infamously looked into Russian President Vladimir Putin's soul and saw a trustworthy man. But I, for one, took Putin at his word when he said in 2005 that the collapse of the Soviet Empire was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. In conclusion, because of our crippling national debt, our overextended and overdeployed military, and our lack of foreign policy credibility, the United States has enabled Russia to begin the rebuilding of its Soviet empire without threat of serious repercussion from the United States and therefore from the free world. The Russian bear has re-emerged from its hibernation, has already snacked upon Georgia, and now seems poised to devour Ukraine. I sincerely hope that this report's analysis regarding Russia's desire for Soviet expansion is wrong. But if it isn't, and I fear it isn't, then let those with eyes to see and ears to hear understand the signs therein. Hopefully, if strict measures are taken to reduce our government spending and to restore our international credibility, we can have the double blessing of deterring Russia's ruthless territorial expansion without American military involvement. Thank you for watching this report. If it has helped you, please help me to keep bringing them to you by donating through PayPal to justwisdom316@gmail.com. Thank you.